Secrets of Early America, How It All Started 400 Years Ago. A quiet dawn, salt-soaked winds from the Atlantic, distant gulls crying overhead, and a small, ragged group of Englishmen stepping ashore. This was the beginning of modern America. In 1607, a fleet sent by the Virginia Company of London anchored not on some mythic New World promised land, but at a tangled marshland on the banks of what they named the James River in present-day Virginia. They founded Jamestown Colony, the first permanent English settlement in North America. Yet this landing wasn't triumphant. The site was a swampy, mosquito-ridden island with brackish water and little arable land. The colonists arrived during a severe drought, perhaps the worst in 700 years. Many among the roughly 104 original settlers lacked farming skills. They searched for gold, expecting quick wealth, but gold was nowhere to be found. Instead, they faced brutal starvation, disease, and despair. During the harsh winter of 1609-1610, later called the Starving Time, survival was grim. Only about 60 colonists out of a few hundred survived. It was sheer will and forced adaptation that kept the colony alive. New supplies and colonists reached Jamestown in 1610, stabilizing the settlement enough for rebuilding. Over time, Jamestown became the administrative capital of the burgeoning English presence in America. Meanwhile, farther north, another story began. In 1620, aboard the ship Mayflower, sailed a group of pilgrims, men, women, and children, fleeing religious persecution in England. After a perilous Atlantic crossing, they landed near what is today Cape Cod in Massachusetts. Then, spotting suitable land, they eventually settled at what became Plymouth Colony. Their first winter was merciless. Nearly half of them died of exposure, malnutrition, and disease. Without help from the local Native Americans, who, it turns out, had suffered terrible losses from European-introduced plagues, Plymouth likely would have failed. But with the aid of indigenous peoples who showed them how to fish, hunt, and cultivate corn, a fragile foothold emerged. In 1621, survivors and their indigenous neighbors shared a harvest feast that later generations mythologized as the first Thanksgiving. Yet modern historians caution that this narrative often glosses over the darker reality. Colonization meant displacement, disease, and dispossession for the native populations who had lived for generations on those lands. Over the next decades, more settlers arrived. Colonies spread up the eastern seaboard. The expanding European presence disrupted indigenous societies through broken treaties, new diseases, rising tensions, and eventually violence. The early colonies also experimented with economics. Cash crops like tobacco in the south, trade along rivers and coasts, and eventually the tragic importation of enslaved Africans. In 1619, near Jamestown, the first Africans arrived in English North America, foreshadowing a centuries-long system of racialized slavery. Still, from these precarious beginnings, a swampy island colony struggling just to survive, a tiny religious community freezing through winter on a New England shore, arose the institutions that would define a new nation. Representative assemblies, colonial charters, early self-government, even ideas of religious freedom and settlement rights. So what does 400 years ago really mean? It's not a comfortable fairy tale of brave pilgrims and noble pioneers. It's a messy, brutal, hopeful story of survival, failure, adaptation, but also conquest, cultural erasure, and exploitation. And though the vast majority died or struggled, their descendants, indigenous peoples, European settlers, and Africans, built a foundation that would one day become a United States. Looking back now, it reminds us that the America we know was born in hardship and contradiction, where dreams and brutality often walked hand in hand. And that's something worth remembering the next time you look at this land. The story of early America is not just one of ships and settlements. It's a saga of hope, survival, and transformation. In the early 1600s, England was looking to expand its influence and secure wealth across the Atlantic, sending expeditions to what they called the New World. In 1607, a group of settlers arrived on the shores of Virginia, choosing a site that seemed promising but was in reality marshy and inhospitable. They established Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement, but life there was anything but easy. Disease, starvation, and conflict with local Native American tribes made survival a daily struggle. Early records show that colonists often lacked basic survival skills, relying heavily on trade and uneasy relationships with indigenous peoples to obtain food. Over time, the settlement adapted, and tobacco farming emerged as a profitable economic foundation, shaping the colony's future. Meanwhile, further north, in 1620, the Pilgrims crossed the Atlantic aboard the Mayflower, seeking religious freedom in a land that was already home to generations of indigenous communities. Their first winter was brutal. Nearly half of the settlers perished, but they learned crucial survival skills from Native Americans, including planting maize and fishing techniques, which allowed them to endure and thrive. By 1621, a successful harvest led to a communal celebration with their indigenous neighbors, later romanticized as the first Thanksgiving. Yet beneath this story lies a complex reality. European settlement brought disease, displacement, and hardship to the native populations. Over the following decades, English colonies multiplied along the eastern seaboard, experimenting with governance, trade, and agriculture. Jamestown developed a legislative assembly, setting early precedents for self-rule, while the colonies faced ethical and social dilemmas as they introduced African slaves to meet labor demands. Life in early America was a mixture of ingenuity and desperation, of alliances and conflicts, of survival and ambition. The settlers endured unimaginable hardships, while the indigenous communities grappled with the consequences of colonization. By piecing together these stories from letters, diaries, and archaeological evidence, historians reveal a landscape of persistence, adaptation, and human complexity. The America that emerged from these first 400 years was shaped by struggle, cooperation, and deep contradictions. A land where hope and hardship existed side by side. Looking back, we see that the early settlers' journey was not simply a tale of conquest, but a story of resilience, cultural intersections, and the foundations of new societies. And that's something worth considering the next time you reflect on how a nation was born from both triumph and tragedy.